All right, good morning, everybody. While we wait for Anna, who's not invisible, she's just a little bit delayed, to show up, I am Bill Gray from Issue 1. For those on the phone, just a reminder, we are recording this presentation, both with phone audio, chat messages, and everything in the room, just to circulate after the fact, because we know news is happening. Some of you may have to leave in the middle of it. I work for Issue 1. We are a political reform group here in Washington that unites Republicans, Democrats, and independents behind solutions to some of the problems that we are going to lay out with digital ad transparency policies on the social platforms. A majority of this presentation is on what policies exist, but toward the end, we will also get into what platforms don't have policies that we think might be problematic over the next course of the 2020 cycle and beyond. To my left is Michael Beckel, who works with Issue 1 as our research director, and the not invisible but soon to be here guest will be Anna Massoglia, who is research lead at Open Secrets, who is gratefully letting us use their space. On this side and this side, you will see the presentations match each other simultaneously, so it doesn't matter which screen you're looking at. If you have questions you don't want to ask during this event for any reason, you can email me at wgray@issue1.org. You can also email Michael or Anna, and they will follow up with you after the fact. We're going to try and keep this to 11 o'clock because, you know, news is happening and most of you have busy schedules. But with that, there's a folder of information in front of you. If you have questions, let us know, and I'll kick it over to Michael.
Again, thank you all for being here this morning. We know it's a busy day. My name is Michael Beckel. I'm the research director at Issue 1. Prior to joining Issue 1 about 2.5 years ago, I spent a decade working as a money and politics reporter, including 3 years at the Center for Responsive Politics and 5 years at the Center for Public Integrity. And I'm delighted to be joined here this morning with Anna.
And I'm Anna Massoglia. I'm a researcher at the Center for Responsive Politics, focusing on dark money and foreign influence, as well as digital ads and political ads. And I'm excited to be here with Issue 1 today.
Great. We, earlier this month at Issue 1, published a new major report about the patchwork of voluntary efforts that have been undertaken by the largest social media companies in the country to bring more transparency to political ads online. Right now, digital political ads do not play by the same transparency rules as broadcast and radio ads. There are no uniform standards, and in this void, companies are taking voluntary measures that really leave Americans getting different types of information from different platforms and different types of information about the ad sponsors. In some cases, companies are covering election-related ads and issue ads. In some cases, they're making these definitions themselves about what counts as political. Legislation such as the Honest Ads Act would create uniform standards for all of the major social media companies to play by. But in this void, the voluntary efforts that we've seen taken so far are leaving us only with a hodgepodge of efforts, these voluntary databases. We spent months analyzing, and the researchers here at Open Secrets have also been analyzing, and there are major challenges to using them, which is why we're here to talk about how to best use them and what you should know about using them. So, as I said, right now, different platforms have different rules for what counts as a political ad. These definitions can change at any time, and in fact are constantly changing. We are in the midst of Twitter changing how it defines political ads and what companies, organizations, candidates, PACs, parties, those kind of things are able to even run ads on platforms could change. And like I said, there are no uniform standards today, and that presents a major challenge for people wanting to know more about who is sponsoring ads trying to influence them. Similarly, each company takes different steps to verify people who run ads, so the organizations and individuals that are running ads don't have to provide the same information to each platform. This also can change at any time and has been changing over the last couple of years since Facebook, Google, and Twitter initially rolled out these transparency measures. So we're going to start with the Google database. The Google database in some ways is the most user-friendly. our research found that there were tens of thousands of ads that were easy to search for, easy to look at, but also they have a very narrow definition of what constitutes political ads. It was designed really with federal candidates, federal office holders in mind, and it's also not being updated as regularly as some of the other databases. So if you log on to Google's transparency report, you will see all the ads from May 2018 through present. Is there a question?
Well, yeah. Would you mind just explaining as you go through each one what kinds of ads people can buy on them? Like, so Google, does that include like YouTube ads?
Exactly, yeah, sorry.
You could just like run through like what?
Yeah.
I don't know what a Google ad is. I mean, I'm a dinosaur.
Sure. So when people, and feel free to chime in if I miss anything, but when people are buying ads on Google, we're talking about buying ads against keywords on Google search results. So you can get text results, you can get image, Google image ads, and also video ads, and it includes all Google properties, so Google and YouTube. On Facebook, we're talking about ads that are purchased on Facebook itself, as well as Facebook properties such as Messenger and Instagram. Twitter is Twitter, Snapchat is Snapchat. Do you have anything to add to that?
That's the gist of it. The different types of ads that are on each platform have varying levels of searchability as well, which is one of the issues that's presented. For example, looking at Google is one example. You have the text ads where you can search the full text of the ad, but with things like video as well as images, it becomes a bit harder since it's not like they're OCRing all of their images and their videos.
Yeah.
And so that does, especially when we get into some of the disclaimer issues later, affect the ability to access various ads within the databases. And probably the subsidiary issues come in more with the various platforms that don't have databases as well, since a lot of those do have different arms.
Yeah.
I think that most people even know when they're looking at an ad on Facebook, or as opposed to just looking at other stuff on Facebook.
On many of the platform, the content is designed to look like organic content.
Because I talk to a lot of people that say, I didn't even know that was an ad.
Maybe it depends on your level of technical literacy.
And there's many people that are not that literate, right?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the companies are taking some steps to label things as ads and could be taking even more steps to label things as sponsored content, promoted content, ad content. You know, but whether it's in your inbox or your search results or your Facebook stream or your Twitter feed, there's a lot of variables that come into play that really, you know, you have to be paying attention to realize it's not an ad in many cases, or realize it is an ad in many cases. So the Google database, Google ads, YouTube ads, updated weekly. It is unclear how long ads are kept in the library. Unlike some of the other platforms, Google hasn't explicitly said how long the ads are going to be kept in the library. In the number of impressions and the ad spending for an individual ad are both given in broad ranges, which is a challenge. Again, if this was spending that was reported to the SEC for TV or radio buys, you would see an exact expenditure. Google does aggregate how much each sponsor has spent, so you can see this organization has spent X dollars, but when it comes down to an individual ad, you're only getting a broad range of how much was spent and a broad range of how many impressions an ad makes. One of the other things that Google has on its interface is a handy chart that shows the top ad sponsors, and then you can search here in the ad database for any particular ad sponsor. As a reminder, after this presentation, we will be circulating this PowerPoint, and if you've got any questions for any of us, feel free to email us if you don't want to talk about them in the room, or at the end we'll do a longer Q&A. But if you, for instance, type in the name of a major dark money group, such as One Nation, you're going to get a thing here on the right, which is the profile of this organization in the database. So One Nation is a major conservative dark money group. One of the things that Google does, which is really terrific, is display the FEC ID number or IRS issued EIN number of every ad sponsor in the database. So you can see right here underneath One Nation, you get their exact IRS issued identification number. So if you've got a group that pops up and starts running ads with an innocuous sounding name, right here you've got some additional information to try to track down this organization, see who's behind it, see if they have existed very long, see what state they've incorporated in. The EIN number is an incredibly important identifier, and it's great that Google is displaying it. This profile also shows you the total number of ads and total spending by this organization and has a graphical representation of how much spending has happened over time. And Google makes it very easy to customize your time search. So there's a calendar box here that you can see all spending, or you can see spending during a particular time period. Google makes it very easy to search ads from particular time periods. And when you do that, you're going to see a whole list scrolling on that page of all the ads that have appeared in that category. So here are some of the One Nation ads that appeared, all clearly showing Senator Claire McCaskill from last election cycle. And underneath each ad, you can see, again, a range for how many impressions the ad made and a range for how much money was spent on each individual ad. And if you click on the individual ad, you will see something that looks like this, which again shows you whether the text, it was a text ad, an image ad, a video ad, the dates, the range, the number of impressions, and if it's a video here, you can play it. Question, Ken?
So can you just define some terms? Like, why is there a range for the amount that they spent?
Google has designed it in a way that they are simply giving broad ranges for how much was spent, even though
they're not telling you how much was spent, they're just giving you an idea.
They are giving you an estimate of how much was spent. Yeah.
Like, you don't go to the store and say, I'd like to pay for something in the range.
Clearly, there is an exact dollar amount, whether it's trade secrets or advertising rate secrets. Google is saying that we're going to tell you in aggregate how much was spent by each sponsor, but when it comes down to the individual ads, you're going to only see broad ranges. As we highlighted in the report, this can mean very wildly varying numbers, that it could be $20,000 or $1 million if you're trying to look at a specific campaign. It's difficult to define on that level. One of the other flaws in Google's database is that some ad sponsors are listed multiple times. So an organization with the exact same name, you can see some examples here from across the ideological spectrum. Some spending in the database is associated with their FEC issued ID number, and some is associated with their IRS issued ID number. And in other cases, a group might have multiple FEC issued IDs, some for the independent expenditures that expressly advocate for or against the election of a candidate, and some for the electioneering communications, which mention candidates but don't overtly call for their election or defeat. So if you're using the database and trying to track spending by a particular group, be aware that you might have to add together different records to get a full picture of an organization's activities. Another flaw that we found in Google's databases is that sometimes the ad sponsors that are listed are actually intermediaries and not the actual sponsor of an ad. So in this case, here is an ad buying firm called Recrew Media. It's got over 6,000 ads associated with it in the database. Here are a couple of examples. We've got one from the American Action Network, one from the American Conservative Union, and in both cases, these are ads that only appear in Google's database with the name of the firm. These are not ads that also appear on a page for American Action Network or any of the other ad sponsors that we found. So that is a challenge also in many of the databases, is sometimes the listed ad sponsors are intermediaries.
And just to throw one more thing in about the intermediaries on Google, that presents additional challenges since with the individual ad buys, they only present ranges of the amounts and spending, so that when you have one ad buyer, such as an LLC like Recrew Media, buying ads from multiple different groups, it becomes really hard to parse out a specific number for how much they were spending on behalf of each group, outside of just, in some cases, widely varying ranges.
One other quick question that came in from the internet, from our chat. They asked about the ID numbers that are issued. It was our understanding, based on the analysis, that obviously if you are a federal candidate or a federal group, you have an FEC issued ID number, and if you are a state candidate or a business or a firm or a dark money group, all of those entities will also have an EIN number. So even if you are a state level candidate or political party, you will still have an EIN number, and that EIN number is going to be listed in the Google database. So federal level candidates often have the federal FEC issued ID, and state level parties and groups often have that EIN number.
One caveat to that is that it's not exactly foolproof on any of the platforms. Google's done a really great job with integrating the FEC ID numbers as well as the EINs, but in some cases there are errors where they've either misapplied the number or applied the same number to multiple different entities, or in some cases with international ads in particular, the same number that would apply to an FEC registered political organization might show up for a random international entity that had nothing to do with U.S. politics. So it's important that if you are just looking at the numbers, to make sure to look at the additional context of the ad, since it's not an exact science at this point, and there are still some inconsistencies in the data in terms of how the EIN as well as the FEC IDs are applied, as well as on top of the ad buyer. So Google also provides the downloadable political ad data in CSV files. This provides some more specific data that is not necessarily available through Google's web interface. It has information on targeting as well as a few more specific numbers. You're able to get more analyzable data by the week, as well as more specifics on things like age, gender, targeting data. There's a lot of limitations to this as well, since much of that is reported by the ad buyers themselves, but that provides a bit more context to the data in many cases. A few different additional caveats to that are that when you're looking at the weekly data, in some cases ad buys are still active, and so they might grow from one week to the next. You also have the issue with the date ranges that Google provides in some cases with the static data, is that the start date and the end dates that are provided don't necessarily mean that an ad was run constantly during that period. In some cases there may be gaps. This is not just an issue that's unique to Google, it's also something that Facebook has struggled with, as well as a variety of different other platforms. But that provides just some additional context, and if you just scroll to the bottom of Google's main page, you can click on the big download data CSV. It's updated on a weekly basis. At Open Secrets, we've been doing a lot of work with this, and we are really excited to have started integrating Google's ad data as part of the integration of digital ad data into our opensecrets.org website. Right now, we have started integrating Google specifically into presidential candidate profiles, and are hoping to continue expanding this work. Right now, we just recently launched our beta version, which if you go to where you see Google ad spending on each of the 2020 presidential race candidate pages, you will be able to see the total candidate spending, as well as any single candidate pro-Trump or pro-candidate spending groups. I'm using just Trump as the biggest example, since he's one of the top digital ad spenders. And so you'll see how much the candidate is spent. In this case, you'll also see how much the joint fundraising committee. So we're kind of pulling all of those groups together and pages together that from Google that you might otherwise have to manually calculate. As well as the single candidate, pro-candidate, I guess, spending more generally. So specifically for Trump, you get a list of the different advertisers that are spending in support of him, who show up in our FEC data, as well as seeing the candidate. You can track weekly spending over time, as well as export to a CSV in a much cleaner format than Google provides. And all of that's just linked up to the candidate profile. You also, can see a list of the different ads. So you can go through and it will give you the start and end dates, again, with the caveat that they're not necessarily run consistently through then, as well as the number of days the ad ran total, with that caveat again, the type of ad, so whether it's a text or an image or a video, as well as the ability to click the link to view the ad on Google directly and get more data from there. And so we're excited to continue expanding this. We just launched this week, so if anyone has feedback, that's always welcomed as well. And that should right now be active for all the different presidential candidates on the 2020 profiles.
Really cool new addition to Open Secrets. I encourage everyone to check it out.
Is that just for presidential candidates, or do you have it for all, like Congress people and senators?
Right now, we just have the presidential candidates online. We're continuing to expand our data and have a lot more internally as well for Google as well as for other digital ad platforms. We've been doing a lot of other analysis and are hoping to continue to expand, but as of this week, we just beta launched the presidential candidates just for Google.
If you're planning to do other ones later.
Yes, we are.
Next up is Facebook. Facebook's political ad library is updated daily, unlike Google's, which is updated weekly. It also contains ads from roughly May 2018 through present. Facebook has pledged to keep all of the ads in its ad library online in the archive for 7 years, which is great, which gives people a good long track record to be able to see this. And some of the issues also with Facebook ads are that the number of impressions an individual ad makes is also given in a very broad range. The spending on any individual ad is given only in a very broad range, although, again, like Google, there is an aggregate spending figure that is a precise figure. And one of the big differences between Google and Facebook is that finding older ads on Facebook is much more challenging. All of the ads load in this infinite scroll capacity, so you really have to manually go through. There's no way on Facebook to search for ads that appeared on a particular day or a particular older time frame. Can be very difficult to look at. So this is the Facebook ad library, and they also recently created a new tool specifically about the 2020 presidential race. So you can now look at all Facebook spending for every presidential candidate. It has an option here, so you can either see all candidates or customize to one candidate or a customized set of candidates. You can also do a custom date range, so you can do all of January 2019 through present or some specific set period, and you can also toggle between the total amount spent or the day-to-day breakdown of the spending.
What's the number? I couldn't see that number.
For Trump, it is about 14 million. Is that right, or am I getting?
So just to give you one caveat for Facebook's top line numbers, they're not all entirely comprehensive. They don't. One of the issues with them is they generally pull from the main pages for various presidential candidates, so they don't include things like, always, it's really a bit inconsistent, things like Trump also spends to promote Mike Pence's page for the promotion of the campaign. You also have things like the Joint Fundraising Committee spending. We have a full updated tally on Open Secrets' new article that came out last week. We just tallied up the candidates in total of the top 4 platforms have spent over 100 million on all 4 of them together. Trump is by far the biggest spender. I would have to double check on the specific numbers for Facebook, but that should be completely up to date on there and is a bit bigger than is reflected on Facebook's tally.
Another question.
How big is the amount of money spent aggregate on these electronic platforms versus what was spent on TV ads? I mean, is it up there with TV ads now?
So they are estimating, people who track this are estimating that about 1/3 of all ad spending in the 2020 election will be on digital ads. So obviously, over time, the share of digital political ad spending has just astronomically increased. You know, if you go back to the or 2008 election cycle, it was tens of millions of dollars, but we are now talking billions of dollars will be spent on digital ads. And dovetailing onto what Anna just mentioned, this is another feature of the ad library, and you can see that Facebook ranks, here are the top 10 spenders. And I've highlighted a couple of things on this. So you've got a Donald Trump page, you get the page name, you also get the disclaimer associated with it and the number of ads and the amount spent. And lower down on that list, you see there's a Mike Pence page that is sponsored by the exact same organization. So the Trump Make America Great Again committee is the big joint fundraising committee that raises money for Trump's reelection campaign committee, as well as the Republican National Committee. That organization is sponsoring 2 different pages, possibly even more than 2 different pages. Similarly, multiple disclaimers can be used to promote the same page. Sometimes, it's just good to remember that this data is messy. So Facebook isn't taking any steps to standardize or group together disclaimers that look to you and me very, very similar. So we've got Tom Steyer 2020 and Tom Steyer 2020, all in caps. And Facebook, for whatever reason, counts those as 2 separate pages with 2 separate number of ads and 2 separate amounts spent. And the similar thing is happening with Pete Buttigieg's page. We've got Pete for America in all caps with ink at the end, which is being treated differently than Pete for America in regular title case. So these are things to be aware of with Facebook. And a third thing that we really ran into is that sometimes pages with ambiguous names are actually run by hyper-partisan groups, and they want an innocuous sounding page to be sponsoring ad content. So we've got a Let's Be Honest page, which is sponsored by one of the biggest Democratic super PACs out there, Priorities USA. We'll get a little bit more into that in a minute, but also just wanted to flag in the ad library, Facebook allows you to use this search for one of any 5 time periods. You can do it for the past day, the past 7 days, the past 30 days, the past 90 days, or all days. And similarly, you can download the data for any of those 5 time frames. You don't get any control over that if you're not checking it every day or every week and something lapses. Facebook doesn't make it real easy to go back and be like, I want to see an ad that ran on this particular date. But they do have these 5 time frames for use as you see fit. So jumping further into Let's Be Honest. So if you click on any of those names out of that list or your search, you'll get a page that looks kind of like this. There's a banner at the top with the group's name, the page name. Over here, you're going to see in the upper right-hand side how much money this page has spent. You're going to see also how much was spent, say, in the last 7 days underneath that. And if you click here where it says See Spend Details, you will see all the different disclaimers that ran to promote this page. So if there are multiple groups or some ads running without disclaimers, that kind of stuff is very easy to see if you click on the See Spend Details information. Also at the top of each page, there is information to see where the people who manage this page are based. So if they're all in the United States, it will say managed by people in the United States. This one has 14 people in the United States. If you find groups that are overwhelmingly or exclusively run by individuals outside the United States, that might raise questions, might raise eyebrows, could be worth looking into as an additional story. And underneath that banner, there is a long list of ads. We've screenshotted just a few. You can see the content of the ads. You can see the disclaimer. You can see a little icon-y thing up here that says whether they ran on Facebook, on Instagram. And there's some filtering techniques, many of which were just rolled out earlier this fall. So you can now filter by location, whether they ran in the United States or elsewhere. You can search active or inactive ads if you want to focus only on ads that are current or ads that are historical. You can again pick a time frame from one of those 5 Facebook preset time frames. So the last day, the last 7 days, the last 30 days, the last 90 days, or all time. You can search only Facebook ads, only Instagram ads, only Messenger ads, and they also added a very useful keyword search. So if you want to search within a particular ad sponsor to see, did a particular group or word, a phrase come up, if you do that keyword search, you will only see ads sponsored by that page that have that word in them, which is pretty spiffy. And if you click on any of those ads, you will get something that looks like any of these 2 things. These are ad profiles, little details that share more about the demographic targeting. So you can see geographically where the ad was targeted. Both of these ads that we've highlighted on this slide are related to the Virginia election that happened earlier this month. So Virginia was primarily the target. You can see information about the age and gender targeting, as well as a broad range of the number of impressions, a broad range of the amount spent. And Facebook recently has also added new information about the group itself. So if it was sponsored by a group that has an FEC issued ID and that group becomes a confirmed organization, Facebook will list that FEC ID number right here along with some additional contact information, website, email, phone number, and pulling some information from that FEC filing that says who the treasurer is, what their email address is, the street address, that kind of stuff. For groups that are only confirmed using the IRS issued EIN number, you see that Facebook says that they gave them an EIN number, but Facebook unfortunately does not display that important identifying information for the EIN numbers right here. So the FEC number you get to see, the EIN number at this time you do not get to see. So if you've got a dark money group that was using an EIN number to get confirmed, you will know that they have an EIN number, but you as a consumer will not know what it is.
And just to elaborate a little bit on the targeting data, sometimes this can be really interesting, in particular when candidates or groups target different ads in-state versus out-of-state. For example, what Michael was showing over here is an ad mostly targeted to Virginia, but that also ran in other states. One of the important things about micro-targeting is that you can just exclude certain audiences. So if you don't want your voters to get one message, but you do want donors in other states to see that message, that is something that pages are able to do. You can also tailor things specifically to getting out the vote in your state versus either list building or soliciting money in other states. So it's really interesting to see how those demographics shift in some cases. With the gender distribution, we've also seen some really specific gender targeting in some cases. One of the more interesting examples I came across was an ad about judicial elections targeting just women over 65 in Florida. And the other version of that ad targeted DC men 30 to 50 or something like that. And it's really interesting to see the subtle differences in the targeting as well as the content of the ads themselves. In some cases, the targeting can speak volumes that even the content of the ad doesn't. For example, when you see get out the vote messages that seem very nonpartisan in some cases, that doesn't necessarily mean that the ad doesn't have another agenda. In some cases, ads that are just encouraging people to get out to vote can, when you look at the targeting, be targeted to very specific audiences, such as people who are really likely to vote for one candidate, likely to vote in line with one issue, likely to vote in line with one audience, likely to vote in line with one ideology. And so in some cases, the ad targeting speaks more than just the content of the ad itself, because it's just encouraging certain voters to get out while not targeting others. And so that can be really interesting. In terms of sponsorship as well, one kind of clarification to what I mentioned earlier with the multiple pages and multiple disclaimers is that it's not necessarily a science that any page that has multiple different disclaimers or multiple pages run by the same disclaimer isn't included in the presidential numbers. It really does vary for Facebook. One of the interesting points with that with Tom Steyer is that his page before he entered the race was seeded by some of his super PACs, where they were spending really heavily to promote the Tom Steyer page, Need for Impeachment being one of the big examples of that. And then as soon as he threw his hat in the ring, they stopped spending to promote his page, and it started being promoted by Tom Steyer 2020. Just a very seamless transition from promoting the same Facebook page that was used by his campaign by the super PAC to being spent by campaign funds. So in some cases, it's really interesting to see where the disclaimers used not only are just different at one point in period of time, but how they transition from when a candidate has entered the race versus who was promoting that page beforehand. And in some cases, that can also be interesting when page names change. Facebook, where you when you look at the details of various pages, you can also see how many times the page has changed. That should be around where you'll see the locations of the individuals. So you'll see page names has not changed here. In some cases, you'll see a page name change 10, 20 different times. And in some cases, it's something really minor, like taking off LLC or fixing that there's a space after a name or something. In other cases, it can be as big of a shift from, one example was a K-pop page that changed to a Korean government page. And so it really does vary pretty substantially. So those are always worth checking to see if a page name has changed, what it changed from, and if the disclaimers in some cases changed along with it. So to give an example of a recent ad that I came across that is not exactly a sufficient disclaimer, is a page called Safer and Stronger. If you see this, it's very clearly pro-oil and natural gas pages targeting New Mexico. You don't really see any type of sponsorship or disclaimer information. Facebook is running these right now. I checked this last night to see if they were still active. It's entirely paid for by the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. And this isn't an uncommon example. This is just one where people who just see the name Safer and Stronger on posts or on promoted page or promoted ads might not know that the organization that's bankrolling the ads has stake in the game here. And so even though you might see this and know that it is to some extent pro-oil and natural gas, you might not know that the association that is has financial stake in it is the one who's ultimately paying for those ads.
So how do you, as a reporter trying to figure that out, how do you figure out that Safer and Stronger is in fact the New Mexico Natural Gas Association?
That's a great question. So with Facebook, even with their page here, they didn't provide any type of disclaimer. And even in the About page, going to their website, there was some information about the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. I was somewhat familiar with it being a front group since I coordinated this with Federal Communications Commission filings. Political ads that are run on radio and TV are required to be disclosed to the Federal Communications Commission. Facebook ads and other types of digital ads are not. So I was able to find some information about the sponsorship and the board members that way, as well as the ads from SDC filings. We have a tool called addata.org that has a live update of full text search of all the different records that go to the Federal Communications Commission for political ad files for TV and radio. And so I checked the group against there, as well as clicking the links, since in some cases they will at least provide a URL, and looking at the disclaimers on their website, looking at where what other websites they link to, that type of thing. But on Facebook's page alone, it's really hard in some cases unless they slip up and accidentally put their disclaimer as the actual organization paying for it in some cases, since Facebook apparently isn't checking and as closely in the case of some pages.
Can I just follow up? I mean, it sounds to me like what you're saying is that it's very easy to hide the identity of the real sponsors on digital ads, that people know that are sponsoring ads, and the platforms know that, and they take advantage of that. Isn't that right? I mean, they could require them to really say more about who it is that's sponsoring it, but they choose not to do that.
It's a hard thing to approach. Facebook has at least been more responsive than some other platforms with closing loopholes, but it's a process. For example, Facebook had a lot of issues with, they only required ad buyers to certify they were in the country. Now they're at least providing that additional information on pages. But it's a process. They've at least continued to increase the level of disclosure they require to increase enforcement, but I don't think there's
a perfect recipe that has happened across the board. It's really hard when you don't have a standardized system between different ad platforms, and they're just doing this on an ad hoc basis.
And just to add to that, clearly there's a lot of games that can be played, and clearly it would be within the power of the social media companies to add more to their disclaimers. Certain communities or municipalities or states have additional disclosure requirements. So some of the California ads, for instance, say in this required disclaimer space, paid for by group name whose major funders are A, B, C, D, E, you know, the names of the individuals or companies or groups behind the ads. And it's clearly not taking up a ton of space on the ad. It's appearing in this disclaimer above the ad. It's very easy for the companies or the
That's
groups.
because of the California law.
Exactly. You know, that could be replicated elsewhere. We'll get to you, Meredith, in just one second.
I'm just going to add on this.
Okay.
There's actually a concept in federal communications regulations called the true identity of the sponsor of an ad. This is a regulation that's been in effect for many years, and it works very well for radio and television, in which the obligation is on the station to ensure that the information they are providing to the consumer is a reflection of who actually bought the ad. And so it works of some kind or another in the television and radio context, and that concept of the true identity of the source of the funds for an ad is also a provision that was put in the Honest Ads Act. But what is important for this context is that there actually has been successful law and regulation that does require the true identity of the source of an ad. It also gets into this question when people try and hide, you know, where the money's coming from by anodyne names. So in this case, if this was an ad that was running on radio or television, as Anna mentioned in the FCC database, there is a legal obligation for that entity to reveal to the broadcaster who the true identity of the source of the funds for the ad, and that's a long-standing concept in law and regulation.
Yep.
Even that isn't foolproof, since the FCC is still, of course, riddled with various issues, as you know.
Question.
On the subject of games being played, with Twitter supposedly banning political ads in a few days, 22nd, what do you expect is going to happen in terms of political entities trying to find loopholes, ends around, or otherwise circumventing Twitter's supposed ban, particularly since issue ads, if I understand it correctly, will be okay?
Do you
We
want?
actually have some slides on that
Yeah, we've got
later.
some slides on that later.
Okay.
We'll get to it real quick.
Thank you very much.
We're gonna do Snapchat very quickly and then get to Twitter.
So just to very quickly go over Snapchat, and then we do actually have slides on that very issue. Snapchat recently launched their political ad library containing ads from June to the present day. It's an extremely difficult library to use on its face. Did you want to present me this, or did you want to go ahead and go through this real quick?
Yeah.
We're a bit crunch for time. So the format through which they have provided this data, instead of providing it in this comprehensive ad library that's clickable and very user-friendly, they provide it in 2 CSV files based on the year. You have to download the CSV files, which then contain Excel files inside of the CSV files that, once you unzip them, are the exact same names, so you can't open them at the same time unless you rename them. And the data itself is extremely messy, but really fascinating once you can get through that, and provide just a wealth of information. It just has a lot of bumps in the road to getting there. We've done a lot of looking through the data and analysis, but it's taken a lot of cleaning, a lot of manual analysis to actually get the information out of it. So Snapchat does provide the exact cost of the ads, as well as the impressions, and as well as unique URLs. And just to go a bit more into the specifics of what Snapchat provides, here's a bit about the data points. If you do actually decide to download the files yourself, these are the names that they've given the files and a bit of an elaboration on what that means. The ADID is the unique identifier. Each one of the ads has these. The creative URL is the actual content of the ads. This is something that you'll open in a new tab usually, and it'll show something like the image here. This is an ad run by One Nation. Originally, when Snapchat launched their library, the URL was broken. They've at least since addressed some of those issues. And the creative URL can be really interesting because Snapchat ads aren't necessarily what most people think of when they think of political ads. For example, with Google, you at least have text, image, video. It's something very graspable to a lot of people. If you're not a user of Snapchat or a member of the younger generation, and it's something that I've had to learn about a lot just by digging through this ad library, you wouldn't really know what format they take. So in addition to just traditional video, you have things called filters where various groups, including dark money groups, will pay to have a filter put over your face. For example, this is a Say No to Socialized Medicine mask, and it will show up either if you're a specific demographic in a specific location or specifically targeted by the ad in some way, in some cases for a set time period around debates. We've seen a lot of filters pop up where people will either take pictures of their TV and have a filter over one of the candidates talking, or of themselves watching the debate, or just a various filters of debate-related things, and that can be demographically targeted to either people who are likely to be the target audience of whatever ad is watching the debate, or geographically around the debate itself, or in certain areas, if it's either state level or just regional. You also get to see the organization name. This is the actual purchaser of the ad. In many cases, this is the firm that's paid, so you'll see a lot of firm names there. In some cases, it is the organization itself. You also get the paying advertiser name, which is the actual ad sponsor generally. This is also not perfect. In some cases, it is the firm as well, but generally the paying advertiser name is the actual sponsor. In some cases, organization name, paying advertiser name are switched, so it's worth checking both. You'll also get the billing address. In some cases, this is the firm. In some cases, it's the organization. In some cases, it's a PO box. It really varies, but can always be interesting and worth checking. You also get the creative properties, which are any URLs listed in the ad, which can sometimes be interesting, and I'll jump to that a little bit more later. You also get some data points that give clues to targeting. You'll get gender, any gender targeted, whether there was a gender targeted. You'll get the age bracket. This can vary pretty greatly from 14 and up to, in some cases, even over 35 to specific ranges within there. The oldest I've seen is over 35. Snapchat is a much younger audience, whereas with Facebook, we've seen over 65 targeted. And then you'll also get more geography, so that can be things like the country code. Snapchat is worldwide. The vast majority of ads, however, are coming from the United States. Snapchat is also growing significantly based on the data we've analyzed. Just since Snapchat launched a little bit over, I guess in September, so I guess about 2 months ago now. Time is relative at this point. So about 2 months ago, Snapchat has quadrupled in terms of spending. So we've seen just really a significant shift there. You'll get, in addition to country code, you'll get the electoral district in some cases, a region ID, which is state generally, as well as a metro ID, which is city. In some cases, you'll get all of the above. In some cases, you'll get none of the above. It really depends how specifically they've micro-targeted the ads. Some of the more interesting points, to me at least, in terms of micro-targeting are interests and advanced demographics. This can be really specific in some cases. So you'll get everything from single moms to college students with debt to retirees with car payments to targeting based on the TV shows people watch. We'll get a lot of things like reality TV or talk shows or CNN watchers or Fox News watchers. And it's really interesting to see what's in there to animal lovers, and it's amazing the wealth of data that will show up in some of these. And we've seen presidential candidates spending heavily to some extent on Snapchat. Snapchat is still much smaller than all of the other big tech and social media companies as an ad platform, but we've seen that growing pretty considerably. With, I think Pete Buttigieg was the first candidate to spend over $100,000 on Snapchat, so that gives you a bit of a context of how much smaller that is than the millions of dollars that are getting spent on other platforms. But he just hit, I believe, the 100,000 mark a few weeks ago. And so just to give you one example of why the creative properties, the URLs that are listed in the ads are really interesting, is this is an ad that was run by Jay Inslee's Super PAC, where it just seems very basic. Do you believe a climate candidate can beat Trump? This is something that doesn't seem abnormal for a super PAC to run. But when you look at the actual data itself, and this is a clean version of the data, it is a very messy database. This is just to give you a bit of a gist of it. And you look at the creative properties section, you'll see Act Now on Climate, which is the super PAC's name. You get to spend, which is the actual amount spent, the impressions, the interest. So to give you an example of just how specific it is, this is TV network viewers, CNN, TV viewers, news, as well as talk shows and a variety of other different data points there. But the creative properties ended up linking to jinslee.com. This was run during his actual presidential run, so at this point is, I guess, old news, but I thought really interesting example of how data can be useful through Snapchat. The Act Now on Climate Super PAC was doing something similar through Facebook as well, where they were redirecting to Jay Inslee's website with a very specific subsource, which meant that the campaign was able to get information on targeting demographics of who was clicking on the links, which is really interesting. And so you were able to basically exchange data on viewership audiences on social media and other tech platforms without actually coordinating between the super PAC and the campaign.
I mean, they couldn't do it without agreeing to do that.
Because the campaign technically doesn't have any say in it. They're just putting a URL there to have a very specific source that the campaign takes the data, it's just there. I mean, it's not something that I've really seen the SEC come down on or really discuss, but I think it's something that's, at least to some extent, a new method of an old game, and so that's something that's really interesting. And then just to move on to Twitter and pass off to Michael.
We'll try to do Twitter in about 3 minutes. So Twitter had an ad library. It's unclear what is going to happen to the ad library now that they are changing their policies. They did disclose the exact cost of ads, the exact number of impressions, and there was no way to download the data. It was very hard to use compared to some of the other things. And Twitter ads in some ways were much more ephemeral because the company only guaranteed that they would stay in the database for 7 days, while many of them did not disappear after 7 days. They have not set a more formal policy than that. They group things into 2 different categories: political campaigning advertisers, and you could click on a list to get all of those, and then issue advertisers, and you could also click on a list to get all of those, and you would have to dig into each of those accounts to get something like this that would show you exactly, you know, the ads that were run under this ads tab. Within that, you could click on that to see more details about spending. You could click on that to get a particular campaign, because they would run these different campaigns, and within those campaigns, you could see the targeting demographics, as well as the actual disclaimer of the group that ran the ad. And if you've got an innocuously named organization, sometimes looking at the disclaimer was helpful. And then there was also a separate tab there. You had the ads tab and the billing tab. And in the billing tab, you would get information about who placed the payment. So that insertion order information could be an individual, could be an ad firm, or could be the organization itself. One of the other things that we saw was that Twitter ads could be deleted. They could disappear. If the tweet itself was deleted by the account, it would disappear from the database. If the account was deleted, it would disappear from the database, or if the account was changed from public to private, it would disappear from the database. However, as we said, there are new policies going into effect, and to get to Dave's question to some extent, the devil is in the details, and it really remains to be seen what games will be played by organizations. On the one hand, they should be banned. All advertisers should be banned from mentioning candidates, from mentioning specific pieces of legislation. Candidates, political parties, PACs, super PACs will be prohibited from running ads on Twitter, as will 501c4s, but 501c3s and 501c6s will not be banned from running ads, although there are prohibitions on the content of those sponsors' ads.
Sure. So just to elaborate a bit on what Michael said, cause-based advertising is still allowed. Twitter has only released very loose guidance on what this actually means. So in terms of banned groups, candidates, political parties, elected government officials, appointed government officials, it's really unclear how this is going to apply in some cases. Mentions of candidates is one of the things that Twitter's language on their website is still a bit inconsistent on whether things like issue ads run by groups that are not listed in the banned groups will be treated if they mention candidates, kind of in a similar way that issue ads on TV and radio. Mentioning candidates can be an issue when they paint a candidate very favorable or disfavorable light, and then ultimately don't need to be disclosed. Policies vary by country, and banned groups don't include 501c3s and C6s. Twitter has issued some guidance, however, for groups that have multiple different arms. So for example, if a group previously applied to be an issue advertiser with a 501c4 arm, they also have a C3 or various other entities, it's not entirely clear how Twitter is going to handle that. They've directed people to their help desk. And so I assume that it may to some extent be on a case-by-case basis. They haven't released a more formal across-the-board policy right now. One other caveat to that is that groups that previously applied to be issue advertisers and political campaigners are not a comprehensive list. Their lists of political campaigners were not always comprehensive, neither was their issue advertisers, and it wasn't consistent with what label was applied to different groups. We saw campaigns show up in issue advertisers. We saw issue advertisers show up in campaigns. We saw groups that were entirely missing from either that Twitter never added. And so it really does vary. And it's not clear what will and will be excluded going forward beyond the specifics of the banned groups. The rest of it is still a lot of it's up in the air how that's going to play out.
And it's clear that there's been a lot of active lobbying behind the scenes by different players to say, are we going to be able to run these types of ads? Are we not going to be able to run these types of ads? Is it fair to be able to have certain interests run certain types of ads? And I think that, you know, this policy is in flux right now, and we will see in the weeks and months ahead exactly where the ground settles.
And is there any indication that if an individual who was closely associated with the campaign, say a campaign treasurer or even a candidate him or herself, wanted to, in their individual capacity, put up an ad that, you know, would be banned if it was from the candidate committee?
It's a two-pronged policy, and so any part of the banned groups will be de facto banned, and then the content prod is the individual could say something like, we need to act on big structural change. Is that going to be banned because it refers to a particular candidate, although not by name? If they mention the name of a candidate or, you know, the image of a candidate, that type of thing, that should be prohibited content and banned. But there could be ways to talk around the issues, saying things in more general ways. There cannot be specific calls to action on specific pieces of legislation or specific endorsements of particular candidates by my reading of the new policy. But I imagine some of this could be litigated and fought over, you know, in courts, if not the court of public opinion.
Bernie Sanders wanted to spend $10,000 himself to just talk generally about people need health care. That could be a gray area.
He is a candidate. He could not do that.
But Bernie Sanders' treasurer wanted to do the exact same thing. Iffy?
I would say
It's
iffy.
not clear.
Yeah, it's not clear.
The same way it's not clear if, for example, legislation is one of the content prongs that's banned, but if you have, say, legislation about a specific issue, just talking about that issue and pretty much duplicating the text of the legislation and saying that that's something good without mentioning the legislation, that's another gray area. There's just a breadth of different areas that it's not clear how they're going to be treated going forward, and Twitter's policy has continued to evolve over by the day almost.
One last point that I want to make. I know we are just bumping up to 11 o'clock right now, so thank you again, everyone, for joining us. All of these slides will be shared after the presentation. If you have additional questions, you can email Anna, you can email me. Our tip sheet is linked to on every slide here. The bit.ly Decipher Digital Ads. Again, happy to stay in the room and answer questions for the next 10 minutes. And again, if you don't get your question answered, please reach out to us. The very last point we wanted to make is that there are other platforms out there some of which don't have policies around this, some of which don't have ad libraries. Again, lacking uniform standards. We are in a patchwork of voluntary efforts. And there are lots of platforms out there. So,
and many of them do allow ads and don't have policies or don't have public disclosure policies. And so there's a lot of different loopholes in those areas as well.
But they don't have separate policies for political, I mean, they must have some policies.
Well, some don't have haven't publicized their policies, whereas other platforms have either banned or significantly restricted ads and just are still riddled with loopholes. There's a variety of different ways to, even on like, so for example, the platforms that do have bans or blocks on political ads, there's a variety of different ways that we've seen either candidates posting and then promoting their own posts, or creating channels or videos. Depending on the platform, it's just different ways for different platforms, since each one takes different forms. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have on. I don't want to like hold us over too much.
To get these visuals, I mean, that tip sheet thing, that URL you have is for this. Is there another URL where you can get the visuals up on the screen?
we will be circulating that. So we'll be sending out I think a press blast, or especially if you RSVP to this event, it will be blasted out to you. Check your inbox.
Okay.
We'll figure out it soon.
There's a lot of things.
Thank
Yeah.
you.